And welcome to NTD Business. I'm Don Ma. U.S. stocks today slumped after the U.S. Federal Reserve held key interest rates unchanged, and Fed officials revised economic projections higher, with warnings that the battle against inflation was far from over. All three major U.S. indexes retreated in the wake of the announcement. The Fed didn't really rock the boat that much. They acknowledged the strength in the U.S. economy, which also lowered the number of cuts that were expected next year. They're implying higher for longer is likely the path they will continue to take. We'll have more on this later in the show. But for the first time in U.S. history, the national debt hit a milestone topping $33 trillion. This is as the nation stares down a possible government shutdown at the end of the month. Now, on Monday, the Treasury Department released its latest fiscal report amid the ongoing fight of overspending. Last week, the report showed that the deficit was $1.5 trillion for the first 11 months of the fiscal year, which was a 61% increase from a year ago. The United Auto Workers' historic strike against General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis is still ongoing, with no deal in sight still. Here's a look at where things stand.
We still have a long way to go.
While the strike remains targeted at one plant for each company, the union warns it could intensify efforts this week if its demands are not met.
We'll see how things progress the next few days, and if we have to amp up pressure, that's what we're going to do.
Top of the list for workers, an immediate 20% raise, followed by 4 additional 5% raises over the 4-year deal. All three companies have countered with a 20% raise during the life of the contract, with an immediate 10%.
We gave up a lot in 2008 to help Ford out during the recession. We didn't get any raises for 3 contracts. So it's time for us to get something.
Analysts say the U.S. economy is getting bruised, but the strike's impact isn't likely to push the nation into a recession.
It would depend very much on how long the strike lasts and exactly who's affected by it.
The spillover is already impacting non-striking workers, with both GM and Ford announcing temporary layoffs on Friday. Suppliers working with the Big Three could also face layoffs soon. Impacted states like Michigan will see a decrease in tax revenue, and buying a car could get more expensive.
It's not that we're going to wreck the economy. We're going to wreck their economy, the economy that only works for the billionaire class.
Elon Musk, CEO of X, formerly known as Twitter, said Monday he's considering charging all users a monthly fee to use the platform. Musk made comments during a live-streamed event on X with Israeli Prime Minister. He said it was the only thing he can think of to, quote, combat vast armies of bots. That was a response to the Prime Minister commenting on keeping bots from promoting hate speech. Musk didn't give a timeline for the possibility or specify what the fee would actually look like, beyond saying, quote, a few dollars or something like that. Musk has been known to hint at big moves like this and then possibly reverse course later in the future. Musk previously said ad sales at the company have dropped 50% since he bought it. X currently charges roughly $8 a month for premium users. Republicans who control the U.S. House of Representatives failed to advance 2 spending bills on Tuesday, as disagreements within the party threatened the ability of Congress to fund the government and avert a partial shutdown at the end of the month. Here's more.
Pursuant to Clause 8.
Infighting among U.S. House Republicans stalled 2 spending measures on Tuesday, pushing the government even closer to the brink of shutdown by the end of the month. One involved a procedural but key vote to move forward a 30-day stopgap measure that would keep federal agencies afloat after funding expires on September 30th. But divisions in his party forced Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to postpone the vote on Tuesday. It's a Republican proposal, but more than a dozen of the party's hardliners opposed it, enough to block its path forward in the House.
Welcome back to the swamp.
They want assurances that fiscal 2024 spending will not exceed $1.47 trillion, the top line of 2022. That's $120 billion less than McCarthy and Democratic President Joe Biden agreed to in May.
And we've reached a bipartisan budget agreement.
McCarthy later said he wanted to give lawmakers enough time to reach agreement on the legislation. Meanwhile, the other motion was again procedural, simply to open debate on a defense spending bill. It was also proposed by the Republicans, who narrowly control the House. But 5 GOP hardliners joined Democrats to block the motion, leaving it defeated by 2 votes. After the raucous session on Tuesday, several more moderate Republicans expressed frustration over the failures. Tom Cole, chair of the House Rules Committee, called the opposition from the small group of his party's hardliners very unfortunate. With less than 2 weeks to avoid a shutdown, lawmakers have begun discussing other options for keeping the government funded. There is at least one bipartisan House group whose members say they're working on a backup plan. Among them, Republican Representative Brian Fitzpatrick said, quote, "Just gotta keep trying to get to yes. And if we can't, and we're coming too close to the deadline, then plan B."
And the Powerball jackpot is now worth about $672 million ahead of Wednesday night's drawing. That's the 10th largest prize in the game's history. A person who matches all 6 numbers can get the full amount of cash over several years, or they can get a smaller amount all at once. Powerball says the odds of nailing the jackpot are roughly 1 in 292 million. And on the topic of artificial intelligence and national security, what are the risks of this new age of innovation, and how can AI potentially help our nation's defense? Senators are seeking more ways to minimize potential dangers in a Senate intelligence hearing. Here's more.
From Silicon Valley to the Senate.
We must equally grapple with the disruptions, ethical dilemmas, and potential dangers of this technology.
Experts described the need to regulate AI so that the breathtaking speed and breadth of tasks AI can perform helps, not harms, national security.
In the 21st century, the general or spy who doesn't have a model by their side is basically as helpless as a blind man in a bar fight.
Even President Biden at the UN General Assembly today, speaking of a need
to make sure we govern this technology, not the other way around, having it govern us.
The Pentagon's chief digital and AI officer told the House last week AI should not be viewed as an all-encompassing solution or a fearful spring of problems.
It is very important to remember that AI is neither a panacea nor a Pandora's box. And if we think about it that way, we're not thinking about it correctly, and we're not going to be able to tackle the problem.
But what we've seen so far from Washington is trouble identifying which AI risks need to be regulated, largely because AI's capabilities are constantly changing.
AI's risks are broad because its applications are so broad, and these risks range from risks related to fraud and information integrity. They include risks related to safety and security.
This year's holiday shopping experience may not be the same as Christmas's past. America's retailers are expected to add 410,000 seasonal positions for the holiday shopping season. That's according to an estimate from outplacement services firm Challenger Gray and Christmas. The projection would mark the industry's lowest seasonal hiring since 2008. Of major retailers who have announced hiring plans, Amazon is the only one so far to say it's increasing its numbers. The retail giant says it's adding 250,000 employees ahead of the holiday season. This would be a significant jump from last year's holiday workforce. And COVID wasn't kind to wedding planners in China, where marriages are traditionally elaborate, expensive affairs. But the industry, estimated at almost $500 billion, is now facing a bigger threat, which is a plunge in the number of couples willing to tie the knot. Here's more.
With the number of Chinese couples getting married in decline, scenes like this are becoming a rare sight. Less matrimony is a worrying trend for wedding planners in China, an industry estimated at almost $500 billion just 3 years ago. Yuan Jialiang ran a full-scale wedding planning business for almost a decade in Shanghai, before switching to wedding photography as demand for his services began to fall, and he hasn't looked back.
In the process of switching from wedding planning to wedding photography, I started to realize that actually couples' demands for photography and videography will not change. No matter how the format of the wedding changes, no matter how the scales of the wedding changes, they still have the demand to record this precious time. So I found that I've made the right career change.
China's wedding industry already hit a rough patch during the pandemic, when many couples delayed their ceremonies. There were 6.8 million marriages across China last year. which is 800,000 fewer than in 2021 and the lowest since the government began publishing the data in 1986. Now, a bigger threat looms in couples less willing to spring for an all-out wedding. Ceremonies in China are traditionally elaborate, expensive affairs, but wedding planners report that couples who do go for it are spending less. This drop in marriage registrations will likely exacerbate the decline in births in China, already one of the fastest aging societies in the world. Many cities deny unmarried mothers child-raising or healthcare subsidies, and having children out of wedlock is often frowned upon. As the economy weakens and consumer confidence wanes, those in the industry are finding little cause for optimism.
The whole environment has contributed to the fact that the wedding industry is not very prosperous now. I was probably hopeful for another big industry climax, but now I'm more worried than optimistic about the prospects.
With high jobless rates and low household spending among the young and the middle class, Jewel Wang, who owns several stores in China selling designer wedding dresses, is staking the future of her company on wealthier clients that have weathered the economic downturn.
COVID caused such a big impact on everybody's lives. As a market, we see an absolute downturn in spending. So all alongside, our strategy have been niche, 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 niche. We don't want to flow with the broader market because we don't think that's in a good place to go.
And China's phonemaker Huawei may launch a mid-range 5G phone as soon as October. This is according to China's IT Times on Tuesday. This would be another sign that the technology giant has potentially overcome U.S. sanctions. Here's the report.
Huawei might be about to launch a mid-range 5G phone as soon as October. That was the report from China's IT Times on Tuesday. The report said Huawei may bring out a 5G version of its mid-ranged Nova next month or in November. The firm did not immediately respond to a request for comment from the IT Times. If the product appears, it would be another sign the Chinese tech giant has overcome US sanctions. Washington has restricted Huawei's access to chip-making tools since 2019. Those semiconductors are crucial for producing the most advanced handsets. So it's left Huawei only able to launch limited numbers of 5G models using stockpiled chips. Last month, Huawei rolled out the Mate 60 Pro smartphone with little advertising or prior notice. Research firms say they've found it's powered by a locally made 7nm processor and is 5G capable. That would be a breakthrough in China's efforts to make chips domestically.
And some workers within Amazon's hardware division, responsible for popular devices like the Kindle Reader and Echo Voice Assistant, they're saying morale within the division has suffered amid staff cutbacks and a pipeline of devices in development that they fear are unlikely to prove hits. Here's more.
In Seattle, it's 52 degrees with showers.
Amazon devices, including the Kindle and Fire TV Stick, are set to get a refresh this week. But workers in the unit that makes those products appear to be feeling less than refreshed. Morale within Amazon's one-storied hardware division, known as Lab 126, has suffered amid staff cutbacks and key executive departures, with many of those remaining worried that new devices in development will flop. That's according to more than 15 current and former employees interviewed by Reuters, who spoke on the condition of anonymity due to their employment terms. Those interviewed described a hodgepodge of new devices in development, including ones that encourage customers to use the once groundbreaking Alexa voice service, which now faces stiff challenges in the age of generative AI and ChatGPT. Reuters was able to identify 5 different new devices under development. These include a carbon monoxide detector and a household energy consumption monitor, both with Alexa built into them, as well as a home projector to make any surface a screen. A spokesperson for Amazon declined to comment on products in development. In a written response to questions about morale, a spokeswoman said, quote, "To suggest that a few anecdotes paint a picture of reality for an organization as large and diverse as Devices and Services is inaccurate."
But the sources said the lab's years of losses and shifting strategies have dampened the mood. Many pointed to the Astro home monitoring robot that launched in 2021 that, at $1,600, remains niche and was criticized for giving some consumers the creeps. That followed a series of poorly selling devices such as a voice assistant-powered clock, the Fire smartphone, and a camera that doubles as a personal stylist. Meanwhile, Amazon said it is developing a generative AI of its own to bolster Alexa, but hasn't revealed much beyond an August assertion that, quote, every one of our teams is working on building generative AI applications.
And Walt Disney said on Tuesday it would nearly double its capital expenditure for its parks business to about $60 billion over the next 10 years. Take a look.
Walt Disney is boosting spending on its theme parks as it faces challenges elsewhere. It told analysts and investors at a conference Tuesday it would nearly double its capital expenditures for its parks business to $60 billion over the next 10 years. Parks have become a reliable profit engine for Disney and has helped cushion losses in the Disney Plus streaming business, which is expected to become profitable only next year. CEO Bob Iger has described the parks as a tremendous business for the California-based global entertainment company. Disney noted in a blog post that periods of significant investment have spurred attendance. Iger has said the company plans to invest $17 billion over the next decade in Florida, where it is embroiled in a dispute with Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican presidential candidate. It also is laying out long-term plans for new attractions and amenities at its Disneyland resort in Anaheim, California. It is seeking to appeal to some 700 million consumers identified by the company's internal research as Disney fans who have yet to visit one of its theme parks. According to a regulatory filing, Disney said it had a strong enough balance sheet and borrowing capacity to fund its growth initiatives. The announcement of the planned investment followed a slowdown at Walt Disney World in Orlando as attendance surges at its parks around the world, particularly Shanghai Disney Resort and Hong Kong Disneyland. Disney also plans to nearly double the capacity of its cruise line, adding 2 ships in fiscal 2025 and another in 2026.
Meanwhile, bankrupt crypto exchange FTX on Monday sued the parents of founder Sam Bankman-Fried, saying that the Stanford professors Joseph Bankman and Barbara Fried used the company to enrich themselves at the expense of FTX's customers. Here's the report.
Bankrupt crypto exchange FTX sued the parents of founder Sam Bankman-Fried on Monday, saying they enriched themselves with company funds. FTX is now led by John Ray, an expert in helping companies recover assets after bankruptcy. It's clawed back more than $7 billion so far since its bankruptcy in November 2022, after it emerged an inside circle at FTX benefited from misappropriating billions in customer funds. The FTX lawsuit on Monday alleges Joseph Bankman and Barbara Fried, both Stanford University professors, of accepting a $10 million cash gift and a $16 million luxury property in the Bahamas, and that they pushed FTX to make tens of millions of dollars in donations, including to Stanford University. The lawsuit said the company founder Sam Bankman-Fried ran it as a family business. It said his father, Joseph Bankman, a scholar in tax law, positioned himself as the adult in the room in the company, but stayed silent when he saw warning signs of fraud, and he did little to prevent customer funds from being misappropriated. Meanwhile, Barbara Fried, the mother, was the strongest influence on FTX's political contributions, causing FTX's former leaders to siphon millions directly to a political action committee she co-founded. Attorneys representing the parents in a statement called FTX's claims completely false. As for FTX's founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, he pled not guilty to charges of fraud, and he's currently jailed ahead of a trial that will begin early next month.
And it seems like records have potentially resurrected from the grave, surpassing CD sales for the first time since 1989. NTD's Sean Marshall visited a couple of New York City's oldest record stores for a look.
Fifth Avenue Records, opened in Brooklyn since 1968, has survived long enough to see a small comeback in the record sales industry. The current owner, Ryan Romansky, stated that COVID lockdowns added greatly to the record industry's resurgence.
Like movies went up, records went up. It's
pretty insane just like how much stuff sells now. And like before COVID, I struggled to sell a record that was more than $50, and now like I can sell $100 records. Like I sold a $200 record the other day, and like I think my highest selling one was like almost $600, and I never was able to do that before.
COVID lockdowns aren't the only reason for a vinyl comeback. Fred Cohen, the owner of Jazz Record Center, says records are growing more popular with a younger audience, and he's noticed the difference after 40 years of experience.
And they're experiencing sound the way it should be heard, not necessarily through little digital boxes, but through the medium that over 100 years ago was created to make this sound audible.
Jonathan McCall traveled all the way from Ohio to New York City. He's making a priority of shopping for records while visiting. He also mentioned how COVID lockdowns gave many the extra time for vinyl research and curiosity.
And it seems like a lot of people went down the avenue of buying lots of records. It definitely, like, used records are more expensive now than they were before COVID. The market definitely seems to have exploded.
Despite its comeback, vinyl is still far from its glory days. Even so, record sellers are enjoying the renewed interest. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
And the Federal Reserve is hitting the pause button on interest rate hikes while it reviews more data. It's keeping its benchmark borrowing rate at a 22-year high. Today's move was widely expected. The central bank has recently signaled that it intends to wait for more data to understand how the economy is being impacted by previous rate hikes. Now, according to the central bank's latest economic projections, it anticipates that interest rates will remain higher for longer. The Federal Reserve is also expecting a stronger economy and lower unemployment.
Today, we decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings. We are committed to achieving and sustaining a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to our 2% goal over time.
The next meeting of the Federal Reserve is set to take place on October 31st and will end on November 1st. And now here with me is Joseph Travisani, senior analyst at FX Street. So it seems like the Federal Reserve kept interest rates steady at this meeting. Yes. Do you think they're done, or are they due for more hikes? They're just skipping this one.
I think the Fed is probably done. Thank you for having me, by the way. I think the Fed is done. I think the biggest problem for the Fed is they can't come out and admit it. And that is one of the things that has come out in the projections. They raised the projection for the end of 2024, even though it's lower than it is now. So I think the Fed is done. They may do one more, but they're not ready to admit it yet.
So one more after this one. So would that be in November then?
Either then or in December at the end of the year. But I mean, after that, I really do think they're finished. The Fed futures say they're finished. Rates are projected to be lower at the end of next year. And I think markets are still very leery of a recession, even though some of the odds of that seem to have reduced.
So what was the reason for pausing at this meeting?
Well, I think the Fed is waiting. Logically, they are waiting for the results of this to take place. There's a long lag from rate policy to actual effects in the market, although not on interest rates, but certainly on inflation. Another reason, of course, is that the inflation rate has dropped dramatically from 9.1% to was then 3.2 and then up to 3.7 in the CPI. So there has been a major reduction in inflation. It doesn't mean inflation isn't a problem, but it means that the Fed has a good reason to pause.
So you're saying the Fed is perhaps done, but of course they wouldn't want to let markets know that. Explain for us why that is.
Well, markets will always front run any position that they think is going to happen. Markets, after all, are trading operations, and you make more money by being in front of the wave, by being the first one to move. If the markets, especially the Treasury markets, were convinced that the Fed is done, then they would start buying treasuries, sending the rates down. The Fed does not want commercial rates at rates that are based on the Treasury market to come off. It needs those rates more than it really needs the Fed funds rate to keep inflation in check.
Right, and this all comes down to their inflation fight. It's about the rhetoric and sentiment, right?
Absolutely. If in the press conference today, Mr. Powell comes out and says, we're finished, we're not going to raise rates anymore, the reaction would be instantaneous and very strong. Treasuries would be bought up, and since their interest rate works inversely to price, Treasury rates would come off. And in fact, they did not. They all went up today.
So after the statement that came out during the press conference, what was Powell's language like? Was it strong or soft?
Well, I think he stayed strong, and he's going to stay strong with the rhetoric, because that's necessary. In other words, if the Fed, that increase in the projections for 2024 is in essence a warning. If the market starts to move in a direction the Fed doesn't really want it to, the Fed can come out and use its rhetorical devices. The Fed can say something that will send the market into reverse. So that's a warning to the markets. Don't move yet. We are not ready to let up the pressure on inflation.
Do you think the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, is worried at all that they may perhaps over-tightened?
I don't think so at the moment. And the reason is you're not seeing a lot of indication so far that the economy is really slowing down, that there's an incipient recession. Job creation has come off, but it's still what would normally be considered very healthy. GDP looks strong. It looks strong into the third quarter. So there isn't really any reason for the moment for the Fed to get overly concerned about that. In addition, the U.S. consumer continues to spend. As long as that happens, and as long as that stays strong, the economy should also.
So if the Fed is not worried that they've already over-tightened and the economy is doing well, then why pause?
Because they are concerned, I think, that they could over-tighten. I don't think there is, put it this way, there isn't any indication in the economy so far that the rate increases, the more than 500 basis points in rate increases, are having that effect. But if you look historically, this kind of rate increase, both the speed and the amount, is something that has often preceded a recession. After all, the way it works is the Fed induces a recession, and that diminishes inflation. So historically, they have a lot of reason to worry.
So, of course, if the Federal Reserve indeed is pausing, then what comes next naturally is perhaps rate cuts. What is the market hoping in terms of that?
Well, I think that is the most anticipated and expected occurrence next. The Fed induces a recession, we get a recession. But so far, as I said, we haven't seen that. The market is hedging its bets. If you look at the spread in the Fed futures for next year, it's a very wide spread, meaning that there is a great deal of opinion, meaning that there is a great deal of uncertainty about how next year is going to play out. It's also an election year. That may not relate directly back to the economy, but it's certainly going to have some impact as the candidates ramp up their rhetoric and the economic questions, of course, will be addressed by the candidates next year.
All right, just one final question. When do you think, in your view, that the Federal Reserve will cut interest rates?
I think we're looking at the second half of next year, and I don't think that's a particularly unusual point of view. What's really happening is the expectations for recession are being pushed off into the future simply because we don't see any indication of it in the present.
All right, thank you so much once again, Joseph Travisani.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, prices at the pump historically drop after Labor Day and the end of summer driving season. However, that's not the case this September. Here's the report.
Filling up the tank is hitting the wallet a little harder than usual.
I'm paying double what I used to pay.
Gasoline prices rose to $3.88 per gallon nationally on Monday, according to AAA. That's the highest they've reached thus far this year, largely due to oil prices pushing past $92 per barrel.
It's getting crazy. My car used to be $40 to fill up. Now it's $69.45. I'm over it.
Although the current national average is below the all-time record high of $5.02 in June 2022, they are 20 cents higher than they were at this time last year.
You know, everything is so expensive nowadays. So you go up 5 cents, you go up a penny, that's going to do some type of impact in your life.
Pump prices are now at least $4 or higher per gallon in 11 states, including Arizona, Colorado, and Oregon, according to AAA.
I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. I never thought that it would ever get to this, but it is the reality of the situation right now.
Gas in the Golden State costs a mint. California commuters have seen them shoot up 49 cents over the past month.
Wow, I should go buy a lottery ticket. It's like $95 even. Yeah, on the dot. So, but yeah, I'm probably gonna need to win the lottery after like paying for this gas. So.
And potentially pain at the pump is not going away soon, and the White House has decided to not intervene as gas prices continue to rise. Senior aides met several times this week to discuss policy options before deciding against any action. But officials say the Biden administration will continue to watch trends to see if prices come down now that the peak summer travel season is over. While usage might be dropping, supply isn't expected to increase after Saudi Arabia extended production cuts through the end of the year. Experts predict prices will continue to rise in the fourth quarter. And now here with me is Patrick Dejan, head of petroleum analysis at GasBuddy. So now, Patrick, normally gas prices, cool off after the summer driving season ends. Of course, we're also seeing U.S. oil prices rise above $90 a barrel. Would you say oil prices have been the biggest contributing factor to higher gas prices here in the U.S.?
Well, I would say oil is probably a secondary contributor to the rise in gas prices. We've seen a myriad of refinery issues across the West Coast, the Rockies, areas of the Corn Belt in recent weeks, and that's really been hampering gas prices. In fact, Los Angeles average gas prices now on the cusp of hitting $6 a gallon, primarily because of 4 different refineries in Southern California that have encountered issues over the last couple of weeks. It's been a very busy summer for refinery challenges, from the heat in the Gulf Coast to the hurricane in California to unexpected maintenance in the Corn Belt. A lot of that has been pushing up the national average. As you mentioned, though, the price of oil now at $93 a barrel, also putting upward pressure on gas prices, resulting in the national average basically holding near where it was a month ago, even as we've now made the switch back to cheaper winter gasoline.
Now, what do we need to see in order to see some relief for prices at the pump? You mentioned refineries. Is there something that needs to happen there?
I definitely think the refinery wild card is the one that probably is having the biggest impact, that needs to get sorted out before we do start to see prices decrease. A lot of these refinery issues are happening at the same time that maintenance is starting at some of these facilities ahead of the winter. Of course, fall is typically a very busy time for refinery maintenance, a shoulder season between peak gasoline consumption in the summer and peak diesel consumption in the winter, diesel and heating oil being the same product. So right now, there's certainly quite a bit of a squeeze at refineries to produce enough product. I think that's the domino that really needs to fall in order to see gasoline prices start falling again. And that oil prices, while they're continuing to see upward pressure, I think once refineries get issues sorted out, we should see gas prices declining. At the same time, we probably won't see the same for diesel. Diesel prices likely to continue advancing in the weeks ahead as we get closer to the start of winter.
I wonder if there's another factor here. Shale oil production in the United States set to decline for the 3rd month in a row. I mean, is that having an impact on gasoline prices?
Well, certainly that's something to keep an eye on. Shale production is a key to total U.S. oil production. And as you mentioned, shale production seeming to be slipping in the last couple of months. But the good news is we are starting to see a few more drilling rigs being added to the Permian. That could eventually help. Of course, the higher price of oil may be incentivizing more drilling activity now in some areas of the Permian Basin. So that could help eventually improve things. But certainly the easy oil in the Permian Basin may be slowing down, and that could be contributing to a decline in shale production. Although U.S. domestic oil production total should continue to increase here in the months ahead.
So in the next few months, are you seeing gas prices come down a little bit? What's your outlook?
Well, I would be hopeful that we can get past some of these refinery issues and that there would then be more downward pressure on the national average, especially in October and November. That's typically when gasoline demand really starts to weaken, coupled with the fact that in late November, or I should say early November, late October, California makes the transition back to cheaper winter gasoline. So whereas the national average stands in the 380s today, I'd be hopeful that by the end of the year, we could see the national average declining into the 350s or so, but that may be as good as it gets.
Wow, I see. I'm curious about another question relating to oil prices. A few analysts are actually saying that oil prices could reach as high as $100 a barrel. I mean, is that likely to you?
I think we're only, we're on the cusp of that. We're only $7 a barrel away, and here we are in September. And keeping in mind that Russia and Saudi Arabia's oil production cuts have been extended through the rest of the year, if we get something like a major cold spell across the country, that certainly could get us to the $100 a barrel mark. Keeping in mind that that domestic production here is increasing, but that certainly may not play much of an active role against Russia and Saudi Arabia cutting production by over 1 million barrels a day. So I think $100 a barrel is certainly something that's on the table, but the market does feel a bit frothy, but the fundamentals remain rather strong.
Right. A lot of moving parts here. I wonder if, is there anything that administration can do to help Americans feel some relief at the pump?
Not a whole lot in the short term, aside from potentially utilizing the SPR again, which is politically fraught at this point. Republicans certainly arguing against it. The administration could have a breakthrough between Russia or Saudi Arabia. Diplomacy could take over. There could be a deal of sorts, although the U.S. has also been talking to Iran in recent months, certainly with the release of hostages or the release of prisoners in Iran may pave the way for some diplomacy between the U.S. and Iran, certainly another major oil producer. So that could be a development as well.
Well, all right. Thank you so much for your insight today, Patrick Dejan.
Thanks for joining.